welcome. Tonight, we will take a quiet journey along the ancient Silk Road, the great network of paths and passages that once stretched from China to the Mediterranean. It was not a single road, but a web of routes threading through deserts, mountains, and cities, carrying silk, spices, and ideas across the world. But this is not a story of riches alone. The Silk Road was also a story of dust, of exhaustion, of weary travelers pressing forward mile after mile beneath an unforgiving sun. It was a story of ordinary people, camel drivers, merchants, guards whose lives were bound to the long caravans that crept slowly across endless landscapes. Imagine the scene. The desert stretches wide, the horizon shimmering with heat. A line of camels moves steadily forward, their bells chiming softly, each step sinking into the sand. The air is dry, the wind sharp, carrying with it the sting of dust. Around you, voices murmur in many languages, the rhythm of feet and hooves blending into a steady hum. Tonight, as you listen, we will walk slowly alongside them. We will feel the weariness of the workers, the dangers of the deserts, the hopes of the merchants, and the mysteries buried beneath the sands. All of it told gently, slowly, guiding you deeper into calm, into rest, into sleep. Let us begin at the heart of the journey with the caravan workers themselves. To travel the Silk Road was not to glide in comfort, but to endure. For the ordinary workers, life was a rhythm of waking, loading, walking, and resting, repeated endlessly until the journey's end, if the journey ever truly ended. Imagine waking before dawn in a desert camp. The air is cold, sharper than you expect. The sand beneath you, hard and uneven. You push aside a thin blanket and rise to tend to the camels, their low groans filling the morning air. They are restless, heavy loads waiting to be tied upon their backs. Breakfast is meager, a scrap of dried bread, tough and flavorless, perhaps a handful of dates or figs if supplies allow. Water is rationed carefully, just enough to wet the throat, never enough to quench it. Already you feel thirst settling in, a quiet ache that will follow you through the day. The work begins. Heavy bundles of silk, wool, or spices are hoisted onto the animals. Ropes are pulled tight, knots checked again and again. The caravan stretches into a line, dozens, sometimes hundreds, of camels and men prepared to move as one. Then the walking begins. Hour after hour, step after step, through landscapes that seem endless. The sand crunches beneath your feet, dust rises with every step, the sun climbs steadily higher, the air grows hotter, your throat drier, your body weary. Still, you press on, for to stop is to fall behind, and to fall behind is to risk being lost. The sound of the caravan becomes its own music, the creak of leather straps, the soft chime of bells tied to camels, the low murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of footsteps. It is hypnotic, pulling the mind into a haze where time itself feels stretched thin. At midday, the caravan pauses briefly. Shade is rare, found only beneath the sides of tall dunes or rocky outcroppings. A simple meal is shared, perhaps salted meat, perhaps nothing more than another piece of bread. The heat presses down and rest is short. Soon, the caravan moves again. By evening, when the sun dips low, the workers are exhausted. Camps are set, fires lit, tents raised against the night wind. The camels are fed, their loads unstrapped, their grunts heavy with relief. Only then do the men eat proper listus of lentils or rice if supplies are generous, or scraps of dried food if they are not. As darkness falls, the desert changes. The air grows cold, the sky alive with stars. Around the fire, stories are told in many tongues of distant homelands, of lost loves, of dreams of wealth at the end of the road. And slowly the workers lie down upon the sand once more, knowing that tomorrow the same rhythm will begin again. The life of a caravan worker was not glamorous. It was hunger, thirst, exhaustion, and repetition. And yet, without them, the Silk Road would not have existed. Their footsteps, their sweat, their quiet endurance carried the world's greatest trade across continents. The Silk Road was not a single smooth path. It wound its way across some of the harshest landscapes on Earth deserts, so vast they seemed to stretch into forever, and mountains so tall their peaks disappeared into clouds. To walk these routes was to test the body, the spirit, and the will to endure. Imagine yourself stepping into the Taklamakan Desert, a place whose name itself means the place of no return. The horizon is a shimmering blur, the sky pale and merciless above. Sand stretches in every direction, dunes rising like frozen waves. Each step sinks slightly, the grains shifting beneath your feet, pulling at your strength. The sun beats down with a force that makes the air ripple. There is no sound but the sigh of the wind, carrying fine grains that sting your eyes and fill your mouth with dryness. By day, the heat is relentless. Sweat evaporates the moment it forms, leaving the skin dry, lips cracked, throats raw. Every sip of water is measured carefully, poured slowly, shared sparingly. Caravans move in silence, conserving breath. Even the camels, those ships of the desert, grunt softly, their heads low, their eyes half-lidded with fatigue. The bells tied around their necks chime weakly, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that fills the empty air. But when the sun sets, the desert transforms. Cold settles suddenly, pressing against the skin with icy fingers. The sand that burned during the day chills beneath your feet. Workers wrap themselves in cloaks, huddling close to fires that flicker uncertainly in the wind. Above, the stars reveal themselves in numbers unthinkable, scattered in bright rivers across the sky. For a moment, the vastness of the desert feels less empty, more alive, as though the heavens themselves are keeping watch. And then there is the Gobi Desert, harsher still in its own way. Here, sandstorms rise without warning. The sky darkens, the wind roars, and the air fills with choking dust. Travelers wrap cloth across their faces, eyes narrowed against the sting. Each step forward, a battle against the storm. When it passes, silence returns, but the landscape has changed. Dunes shifted, tracks erased, landmarks swallowed. It is easy to lose direction, easy to wander into emptiness. Many never return. Beyond the desert's weight, the mountains, the Pamir Range, called the roof of the world, rises with slopes steep and unforgiving. Paths narrow to thin ledges, clinging to cliffsides, where a single misstep means a plunge into valleys below. Snow and ice coat the ridges, even in summer, and winds howl ceaselessly through the passes. At night, the mountains groan with avalanches, rocks tumbling in echoes that roll for miles. Travelers sleep uneasily in caves or beneath rough shelters, the cold biting through layers of wool. Fires struggle against thin air, their flames small and weak. Breathing itself is an effort, yet, even in their harshness, these landscapes offered beauty. In the desert, dawn painted the sand in shades of pink and gold. At dusk, long shadows stretched across dunes, giving them the look of endless waves. In the mountains, glaciers glowed with blue light, streams ran clear and cold, and valleys bloomed briefly with wildflowers during short summers. To weary travelers, these sights were fleeting gifts, reminders of life in places that seemed so determined to take it away. The Silk Road demanded passage through these extremes. The deserts drained strength, but those who endured, step by step, carried not only goods across the land, but also the stories of landscapes that shaped their journey. For every bolt of silk, every sack of spice, there were miles of sand, stones, and snow, each one a silent toll taken from those who dared to walk the road. On the Silk Road, survival was not guaranteed. Every step through desert or mountain raised the same pressing questions. What will we eat? Where will we sleep? How will we endure another day? For the caravan workers, food and shelter were not comforts, but fragile necessities that could never be taken for granted. Imagine the morning meal. There is no feast, no table laid with abundance. Instead, the workers gather around a small fire, crouching against the cold wind. A pot rests above the flames, its contents simple grains of millet boiled into a thin porridge, sometimes flavored with a pinch of salt, sometimes plain. Each man receives only a small bowl, just enough to ease the hunger that never truly fades. Alongside it, perhaps a hard piece of bread, dry and rough, chewed slowly with water to soften it. Water, of course, was the most precious of all. Caravans carried skins of it tied to camels' sides, but every drop had to be measured. A careless sip could mean thirst tomorrow, or worse, none left at all. In the deserts, wells were rare and often unreliable. Sometimes water was drawn from hidden springs, cool and sweet, a treasure discovered after days of parched throats. Other times, travelers dug into dry riverbeds, pulling up muddy trickles, straining them through cloth to make them drinkable. At midday, when the sun burned hottest, the caravan paused briefly. Workers gathered in the shade of camels or in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. Meals were small, meant only to keep bodies moving, perhaps dried figs, nuts, or salted strips of mutton that left the mouth thirstier than before. If fortune was kind, dates or raisins offered a rare sweetness, a brief comfort in a harsh world. Evenings were when true meals were shared, if supplies allowed. Fires dotted the camps, their smoke drifting into the cold desert air. Pots simmered with lentils or rice, flavored by onions or garlic, carried carefully from markets. Spices were precious, sometimes traded among workers, a pinch transforming a simple meal into something almost luxurious. Bread was baked flat on heated stones, its smell drifting warmly through the camp. Camels grumbled nearby, their loads finally lifted, their bodies sinking into rest. Shelter was just as vital as food. In the open desert, there was little to protect against wind and sand. Tents made of felt or hide were raised quickly, their poles hammered into the shifting ground. Inside, men huddled close, the air heavy with smoke and breath. In the mountains, caves or rocky overhangs provided refuge, though the cold seeped into every bone. Fires were small and precious, would often carried from miles just to spark a flame. In some regions, caravanserais built along the trade routes offered relief. These stone structures stood like fortresses against the wilderness. Within their walls, travelers found courtyards to rest camels, rooms with straw mats to sleep upon, and wells of water guarded carefully. The air inside hummed with many tongues: Persian, Chinese, Arabic, Turkakaz. Merchants and workers gathered in one place, sharing news, stories, and food. For a few nights, at least, survival was less uncertain. But not every night brought shelter. Sometimes the desert offered only open sky. Workers lay on rough blankets, the sand cold beneath them, the stars sharp above. They pulled cloaks tightly against the chill, listening to the low hum of wind and the restless groans of camels. In those moments, the line between endurance and exhaustion blurred. Yet sleep still came, carried on the rhythm of fatigue, the body surrendering to rest despite hunger, thirst, or fear. Survival on the Silk Road was never easy. Every mouthful of food was earned by miles walked. Every sip of water was precious, remembered long after it was gone. And every night of shelter, whether in a tent, a cave, or a caravanserai, was a reminder that the journey still stretched onward, demanding strength again with the dawn. The deserts and mountains of the Silk Road held dangers beyond thirst and exhaustion. Among the most feared were not the storms, nor the avalanches, but the men who hid in shadows, raiders and bandits, waiting for caravans heavy with silk, spices, jewels, and grain. Imagine traveling with the caravan for days, the rhythm of footsteps and bells steady, the road quiet but uneasy. You sense the weight of the goods strapped to camels' backs, bolts of silk from China, blocks of tea, sacks of saffron, carved ivory, and bright gems. To merchants, these were fortunes. To bandits, they were temptations too great to ignore. Stories passed among travelers whispered of ambushes, a caravan disappearing into a storm, only to be attacked when vision was weakest. Raiders swooping down from hillsides, their horses fast, their cries sharp, scattering men before they could form a defense. Sometimes entire groups vanished, their goods stolen, their workers left behind in silence. Guards were always part of a caravan. They marched with spears, carried bows, watched the horizon with sharp eyes. At night, when the fires flickered, guards circled the camp, listening for hoofbeats in the distance. Yet even guards knew their limits. Raiders were clever, knowing the paths, the hiding places, the weak spots in a line stretched thin across the land. Imagine the moment of fear, the sound of hooves thundering suddenly from a ridge, shadows cresting the horizon, dust rising in a storm of motion. Shouts erupt, men scrambling to defend, camels startled, ropes pulling tight. In the confusion, goods topple, baskets split open, fabrics and spices spilling into the sand. The cries of men mix with the bellows of frightened animals, the order of the caravan dissolving into chaos. Some ambushes ended quickly, a few goods stolen, a few camels driven away, and the raiders gone as swiftly as they came. Others were more brutal and dire, caravans stripped bare, their workers left with nothing but survival. In those moments, the road itself seemed cruel, indifferent to the suffering it carried. But fear did not silence the caravans. Merchants and workers pressed on, knowing that without risk there was no reward. Precautions grew. Caravans traveled in larger groups, sometimes hundreds strong, so that their numbers discouraged attack. Paths shifted to safer routes, even if they were longer. Alliances were made with local rulers, who promised protection in exchange for tribute or trade. And still, the fear lingered. Each bend in the road carried possibility. Each rocky outcrop might hide waiting eyes. Even the silence of the desert became ominous, as though holding its breath. Workers walked with heads low, glancing often at the horizon, wondering if tonight or tomorrow would bring the sound of raiders' crash. Yet, within this fear, there was resilience. Caravan workers learned to move quickly, to rebuild order after chaos, to carry on with what remained. Merchants mourned their losses, but they continued the trade, for silk and spices were worth the risk. The Silk Road lived not because it was safe, but because men accepted the danger. Step after weary step, the fear of raiders was constant, but so too was the determination to continue. And in the end, it was that determination, the quiet will to endure despite risk, that carried the Silk Road forward across centuries. Among the many travelers of the Silk Road, few names echo louder than Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant whose journey from Europe to China became legend. His story, told and retold for centuries, is one of endurance, curiosity, and the allure of distant lands. Yet behind the grandeur of his tale lies the same hardships every traveler faced: hunger, and the uncertainty of survival. Imagine Marco Polo as a young man setting out from Venice in the year 1271, not alone, but with his father and his uncle Maffeo. Venice was already a city of trade, its ships crossing seas heavy with goods, its markets alive with color and sound. But the Polo family sought something greater, not just trade in the Mediterranean, but access to the riches of the East. Their journey began across the Mediterranean and into the Middle East, through cities alive with voices, smells, and unfamiliar tongues. In Acre, Baghdad, and Hormuz, Marco Polo first encountered the vastness of cultures beyond Europe's silks gleaming in the sun. Spices sharp and fragrant, jewels cut with precision he had never seen before. Each city was a world in itself, yet only the beginning. From Persia, the Polos traveled into harsher lands. They crossed deserts where the sun scorched and the sand seemed endless. Marco described long stretches where nothing grew, where wells were scarce, and where travelers marked their way by bones left from those who had perished before. At night, they slept beneath skies unfamiliar, the stars forming new constellations above them. Into the mountains they climbed, the Pamirs and beyond, paths narrow and treacherous, air thin and biting. Marco Polo later wrote of snow so deep and cold that men and animals alike nearly froze, of winds so strong that voices were lost in the air. Yet they pressed on, for beyond the mountains lay lands few Europeans had ever seen. Finally, after years of travel, they reached the empire of the Mongols, a realm vast beyond imagination, stretching across deserts, grasslands, and cities of stone. At its heart stood the court of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, a ruler whose power and wealth were unmatched. Marco Polo entered that court not as a simple merchant, but as a guest. He marveled at palaces larger than entire European towns, their halls filled with silk banners, golden dishes, and the scents of rare spices. He described banquets where hundreds dined at once, music filling the air, dancers moving in patterns of elegance. He wrote of falcon hunts with thousands of birds, of elephants carrying nobles, of armies vast enough to darken the land with their numbers. Yet, his writings also carried the texture of daily life in lands far from home. He described the markets of Kashgar, Samarkand, and Beijing, where merchants from every corner of the world gathered. He noted the strange fruits, the fine fabrics, the customs of local people, from tea drinking to paper money, an invention unknown in Europe at the time. For 17 years, Marco Polo remained in the service of Kublai Khan, traveling through provinces of the empire, observing, learning, recording. He saw deserts that swallowed cities, rivers wide as seas, bridges of stone that seemed impossible to build. He heard languages unknown, watched ceremonies of religions unfamiliar, and carried it all in memory. When at last he returned to Venice, his tale seemed too extraordinary to believe. Many doubted him, yet his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, spread across Europe, filling imaginations with visions of the East. It inspired not only merchants, but explorers, among them Christopher Columbus, who carried Polo's book with him centuries later. Marco Polo's journey was unique, but it was also part of the same Silk Road walked by countless others. He endured thirst, hunger, storms, and the endless miles, just as ordinary caravan workers did. His fame survived, while their names were forgotten. But together they walked the same road, one step after another, shaping the fragile bridge between worlds. The Silk Road was never just a line between East and West. It was a living artery of cities, markets, and oases, places that blossomed for a time, then faded into silence. Many of these cities thrived for centuries, filled with life, trade, and laughter, only to vanish beneath sand and time. Their ruins whisper still, fragments of stone and pottery half buried in deserts, echoes of voices carried away by the wind. Imagine traveling through the Taklamakan desert and stumbling upon the ghostly outline of a city long forgotten. Sand drifts over walls, roofs collapsed into dust, yet something remains, a gateway, a tower, faint carvings on stone. This was once a thriving station of the Silk Road, where caravans rested, markets buzzed, and travelers from distant lands crossed paths. Now it lies silent, its people gone, its name remembered only faintly in the pages of history. One such place was Lulan, near the shifting sands of the Tarim Basin. For centuries, it stood as a prosperous hub, its streets filled with merchants and pilgrims. Canals brought water, markets offered goods from across the world. Yet the river that sustained it slowly changed its course. Without water, Lulan withered. By the 4th century, it was abandoned, swallowed by sand. When archaeologists rediscovered it in the early 20th century, they found remnants of houses, temples, even human remains, lying as if the desert had frozen them in time. Another lost city is Naya, also in the Tarim Basin. Once, it was alive with orchards, fields, and homes built of timber and mud. Documents written on wooden slips revealed details of daily life, marriages, disputes, taxes, all ordinary human affairs, preserved in silence for centuries. Today, its ruins are scattered, wooden beams blackened by time, textiles buried but still holding their patterns of color. The people of Naya are gone, but their voices remain in these fragments, fragile and enduring. Further west, cities like Merv, Samarkand, and Bukhara rose to splendor, filled with mosques, madrasas, palaces, and bustling bazaars. While some endured, others collapsed under invasions, fire, or the slow erosion of time. Walls crumbled, libraries burned, and what was once the pride of empires became little more than broken stone. Yet, even in ruin, their beauty lingers. Standing among cracked tiles and faded mosaics, one can still imagine the brilliance of their past. The Silk Road was littered with these mystery settlements that bloomed briefly, then vanished. Some were buried by shifting dunes, their roofs poking out like bones of the earth. Others were drowned by rivers that flooded and changed course. Some simply faded when trade routes shifted, leaving them isolated, forgotten by travelers. Archaeologists who dig in these sands uncover not only ruins, but lives. In Lulan, mummies were found, preserved by dryness, faces still visible after centuries, their clothes woven with intricate patterns, their hair braided carefully. In Naya, sandals, baskets, and fragments of letters speak of people as real as us, living ordinary days of work, worship, and love. In Merv, fragments of ceramic bowls still hold the shapes of meals once shared. Standing in these ruins today, the silence is heavy. The wind blows softly across the stones, carrying fine grains of sand. The air hums with absence, with the weight of time. And yet, there is beauty in that silence. The lost cities remind us that nothing endures forever, not walls, not markets, not even the busiest crossroads of the world. But they also remind us of connection. For centuries, these places tied east and west together, carrying silk, spices, stories, and dreams. Even in their ruin, they tell us of resilience, of creativity, of the fragile but enduring pulse of humanity. If the deserts and mountains of the Silk Road were trials of endurance, then its markets were its reward. Here, after weeks or months of dust and hunger, caravans poured into cities where life shimmered with sound, scent, and color. Two names stood above all others: Samarkand and Kashgar, the jewels of Central Asia, where the Silk Road breathed with its fullest energy. Imagine approaching. The city rises from the plain like a vision, and walls of brick and tile shimmer with intricate patterns of turquoise and gold. From a distance, the hum of voices already drifts on the air, carried by wind. As you pass through the gates, the sound grows into a chorus, thousands of voices speaking in dozens of languages, all blending together into one restless rhythm. The marketplace stretches wide, its stalls bursting with goods. Merchants from China unfurl bolts of silk that ripple in the light, smooth and shining in shades of crimson, jade, and gold. Traders from India display sacks of spices, cinnamon, cardamom, pepper filling the air with their sharp fragrance. From Persia come carpets rich with color, their patterns intricate, each one a story woven in wool. From the steppes arrive horses, sleek and strong, stamping hooves restlessly as buyers test their worth. The air is alive with scent. The sweetness of dried apricots and figs mixes with the smokiness of roasting lamb. Spices sting the nose. Perfumes of rose and musk drift from small glass bottles. Incense burns in quiet corners, its smoke curling softly above the crowd. Voices call constantly. Merchants shout prices, praising the quality of their goods. Buyers haggle fiercely, hands waving, coins clinking in pouches. Children dart between stalls, clutching dates or sweetbread. Musicians sit on carpets, plucking strings or tapping drums, their melodies threading above the noise. The market is not just traded, is theater, performance, and life itself. And then there is Kashgar, a city at the western edge of China, a crossroads where cultures collided. The bazaar here is vast, spilling through streets and alleys, a labyrinth of color. Donkeys bray, camels groan, sheep bleat as herders guide them through narrow lanes. Stalls glow with copper pots, knives glinting in the sun, fabrics stacked in high piles, baskets of nuts and spices spilling onto the ground. Here, the languages of the world mingle. One man bargains in two tongues at once, switching fluidly between them. A pilgrim from India sells prayer beads beside a monk from Tibet, offering small scrolls of scripture. Ideas pass hand to hand as easily as goods, religion, philosophy, stories of lands beyond the horizon. Food is everywhere. Flatbreads bake on the sides of clay ovens, pulled out hot and steaming. Cups of tea, fragrant and sweet, are passed from hand to hand. After days of dried meat and stale bread, such flavors feel like miracles. At night, when the market's quiet, the cities remain alive. Lanterns glow above courtyards. Shadows dance against tiled walls. Music rises against flutes, drums, voices singing softly of home, of journeys, of longing. Merchants rest at last, counting their coins, dreaming of tomorrow's bargains. Travelers sit in inns, their minds overwhelmed by the richness of what they have seen. The markets of Samarkand and Kashgar were more than places of trade. They were crossroads of the world, where east met west, where north met south, where goods, ideas, and people mingled endlessly. To step into these markets was to step into the heartbeat of the Silk Road itself, heartbeat that pulsed with energy, color, and the unending hum of humanity. The Silk Road was not only a highway for silk and spices, it was also a path for ideas, beliefs, and traditions carried not in bags or baskets, but in songs, stories, scriptures, and rituals. To walk its roads was to walk through a tapestry of cultures, each thread weaving into the next until the borders blurred. Imagine the caravanserai at dusk, its courtyard filled with travelers from every corner of the known world. A monk from India sits quietly, prayer beads in hand, murmuring verses of the Buddha beneath the stars. Across the courtyard, a Persian merchant spreads his carpet for evening prayer, bowing toward the west. Nearby, a Nestorian Christian trader lights a small lamp, its flame trembling as he traces the sign of the cross. At the same time, a Zoroastrian lights incense, lifting his face toward the fire as a symbol of eternity. The Silk Road was a river, and faith flowed along it. From India, Buddhism traveled north and east, carried by monks who walked the mountains with scrolls tucked beneath their robes. In the caves of Dunhuang and the temples of Khotan, their words were painted onto walls, their images carved into stone. Travelers who paused there saw golden Buddhas gazing serenely from shadows, their calm eyes watching over weary pilgrims. From Persia and Arabia, Islam spread, carried by traders whose faith was part of every bargain, every greeting. Mosques rose in desert towns, their minarets slender against the horizon, calling the faithful to prayer even as the caravans pressed onward. Markets echoed with the rhythm of Arabic words, blessings whispered over coins, food, and silks. From the west, Christianity came in many forms. Nestorian priests traveling eastward, their churches small but enduring. They carried manuscripts in Syriac and Latin, stories of saints and martyrs, told to audiences who listened with curiosity, if not always with conversion. Crosses carved in wood or stone stood quietly along the way. Reminders that even at the edge of empires, faith sought new homes. Older beliefs endured as well. Zoroastrianism, with its sacred fire and dual vision of light and darkness, still burned in hearts across Persia. In Central Asia, shamans invoked spirits of wind and sky, calling upon ancestors in rituals that tied them to the land itself. The Silk Road did not erase these traditions, it wove them together, and with religion came culture. Languages intertwined, Persian poetry recited in Chinese courts, Indian epics translated into Turkic verse, art blended, two silks painted with Buddhist symbols carried westward, glassware from Rome glittering in Eastern markets. Even music traveled, flutes and drums changing hands, their melodies shifting with every mile. Imagine sitting in a caravan camp at night, the fire burning low. A Persian recites verses of Hafez, his voice smooth and slow. A Chinese traveler replies with a story of dragons and emperors, his words translated through a chain of languages. A monk hums a chant, and a shepherd adds the rhythm of his flute. In that moment, borders vanish. Only humanity remains, different tongues, different gods, one fire beneath the stars. The Silk Road was not only a bridge of trade, it was a bridge of minds and souls, where faiths met, not always in harmony, but always in presence. And though empires fell and cities vanished, the ideas that traveled these paths remained, shaping worlds far beyond the deserts and mountains that first carried them. For the caravan workers, life along the Silk Road was hardships in the mouth, hunger in the belly, exhaustion in every step. But for the wealthy merchants who commanded the caravans, the road held another face, one of privilege, comfort, and power. Imagine the caravan camp at night. On one side, workers huddle in worn cloaks, eating thin soup from wooden bowls, the wind pressing cold fingers against their backs. On the other side, beneath a richly woven tent, merchants recline on carpets, cushions at their sides, tables set with plates of roasted lamb, fragrant rice, and sweet fruits dried carefully for the journey. The contrast is sharp. The same road, the same dangers, but two entirely different lives. The tents of the wealthy were like small palaces. Carpets from Persia softened the ground. Embroidered hangings shielded the wind. Brass lamps filled the space with warm glow. Servants moved quietly, pouring tea or wine, arranging dishes, adjusting pillows. Incense burned in small braziers, filling the air with the scent of sandalwood or musk, a sharp difference from the smoke of common fires. Meals were not hurried scraps, but rituals. Silver trays carried delicacies, almonds, figs, honey cakes, skewers of meat spiced with cinnamon or cumin, fine tea leaves brought from China, brewed into fragrant cups. Where workers rationed water, merchants drank wine or sherbet, cooling their thirst with sweetness. Their caravans, too, looked different, while ordinary travelers walked with dusty feet. Merchants often rode on tall camels draped with colorful saddles, or on horses bred for speed and elegance. Their animals carried not burdens of rope and grain, but goods packed in lacquered chests, silks wrapped in waxed cloth to keep them safe from rain and sand. Guards rode alongside, hired to protect fortunes too precious to lose. And wealth brought not only comfort, but influence. In markets, a wealthy merchant's arrival stirred excitement. Officials greeted them with respect. Innkeepers offered the best rooms. Musicians gathered to entertain. At caravanserais, their presence was marked by abundance. Tables laid with food, scribes recording deals by lantern light, translators negotiating in many tongues. But privilege had its own burdens. A poor worker lost only hunger or strength. A wealthy merchant risked fortunes. Every storm, every raid, every illness threatened to erase years of profit. They carried more than silks and spices. They carried risk, their wealth tied to the fragile survival of the road. Their days were filled with calculation. Which route to take, which markets to trust, which rulers to appease with gifts. Letters sealed with wax traveled with them. Deals written in contracts, carried in chests. Maps drawn carefully by hand. The Silk Road was not only walked by feet, it was walked by promises, alliances, and bargains inked beneath flickering lamplight. And yet, despite their worries, the lives of the wealthy were marked by luxury that most could not imagine. They listened to music at night, entertained poets or storytellers, collected fine objects from every land they passed. Their tents were museums of the world. Chinese porcelain beside Persian glass, Indian spices beside Roman coins, all gathered in one place, all testaments to their reach. Still, even the wealthy could not escape the road's hardships entirely. Sandstorms ignored, gold, hunger gnawed even at those with servants, and disease did not always distinguish between rich and poor. A merchant could sit on silk cushions and still shiver with fever. The road reminded all worker or master that nature and fate were stronger than wealth. Yet when the caravan finally reached a great city, Samarkand, Kashgar, Baghdad, or beyond, the rewards of wealth were clear. The merchant entered in procession, his goods displayed, his coffers heavy. He walked into palaces, negotiated with rulers, dined at tables of nobility. His name carried weight, his presence commanded respect. For the merchant, the Silk Road was both stage and empire. Each step was a gamble, each market a battlefield of bargaining. And though their lives glittered with comfort, it was the weary footsteps of workers, the groaning of camels, and the silence of the desert that carried their wealth forward. The Silk Road was built on contrasts, hunger and abundance, dust and gold, labor and leisure. And nowhere were those contrasts sharper than between the worker who walked and the merchant who rode beside him. The Silk Road was more than paths across deserts and mountains. It was a living thread that bound the world together, a fragile bridge stretching thousands of miles across cultures, languages, and faiths. Its stones have crumbled, its cities have fallen silent, but its memory endures woven into the fabric of history. The legacy of the Silk Road lies first in its connections. Goods moved, yes, silk from China, glass from Rome, spices from India, silver from Persia, but so too did ideas. Paper, printing, and gunpowder traveled westward. Astronomy, medicine, and mathematics moved eastward. Religions flowed in every direction: Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, each carried by footsteps and voices. The Silk Road was not only commerce, it was conversation, a dialogue that reshaped the world. Its legacy is also in its fragility. Cities rose and fell, swallowed by sand, erased by shifting rivers, destroyed by conquest. Markets that once roared with life now lie silent beneath dunes. Caravanserais crumble into dust. Yet, even in ruin, they tell us of a world once vibrant, once connected, once alive with movement. For the workers, the legacy was endurance. They are not named in chronicles, their faces forgotten. Yet it was their hands that tied the ropes, their footsteps that carved the paths, their strength that carried the weight of empires. For the merchants, the legacy was ambition, wealth gathered across continents, fortunes made and lost, their names etched into records of trade and politics. Today, fragments of the Silk Road remain. In museums, silk once carried across deserts still shimmers. In ruins, inscriptions still whisper the names of forgotten cities. In recipes, in music, in words, traces of those connections endure. To walk through a modern bazaar is still to hear echoes of the Silk Road, voices bargaining, laughter rising, the hum of life continuing. The road itself has faded, but the story it wrote lives on, not in stone, but in us. And now, as our journey ends, imagine the Silk Road at night. The desert stretches vast, the stars sharp above. A line of camels moves slowly, their bells chiming softly, the sound carrying into silence. Fires burn low in the camps, smoke rising faintly into the cold air. Voices murmur quietly, stories shared in many tongues, drifting like dreams. Picture the workers asleep on the sand, cloaks wrapped tightly, their bodies weary but enduring. Picture the merchants in their tents, surrounded by goods, eyes closed at last after a day of bargaining. Picture the watchmen standing still at the edge of camp, listening to the wind, the world hushed around them. The road is endless, but for now it rests. Tomorrow will bring another dawn, another march, another stretch of sand or stone. But tonight it is quiet. The Silk Road breathes slowly, as though lulled to sleep itself. As you listen, let that stillness carry you too. Let the rhythm of footsteps fade, the weight of goods lighten, the sound of bells soften until only silence remains. You are no longer walking through heat or cold, no longer burdened by hunger or thirst. You are resting as the caravans once rested, beneath stars eternal and skies vast. The Silk Road has faded into memory, but its quiet hum lingers still, and in that hum, in that silence, you may find peace. Close your eyes. The road stretches onward, but for you it is enough to rest. Sleep now, as the caravans once did, tired, but safe beneath the endless sky.